For decades, audiences felt they understood Robin Williams as a public figure defined by humor, speed, and boundless performance energy. He represented a rare kind of entertainer whose presence alone could transform a room. However, colleagues who worked closely with him often described a far more layered personality. Behind the improvisation and constant movement existed someone highly observant, emotionally perceptive, and deeply aware of the people around him. Stories shared years later by fellow actors suggest that his greatest impact was not always on screen, but in quiet moments between takes. These accounts help reshape how history views him, not only as a performer, but as someone who understood emotional nuance at an unusually deep level. When examining his career from a documentary perspective, it becomes clear that the public image of non-stop comedy only captured part of who he was. The rest existed in small gestures, personal conversations, and choices made when cameras were not rolling. Understanding that contrast provides important context when analyzing both his professional legacy and the relationships he built throughout his life. When a major family comedy film brought together an already respected dramatic actress and a globally famous comedian, the collaboration created an unusual balance of performance styles. One performer approached scenes with careful preparation, emotional restraint, and technical discipline. The other relied on speed of thought, improvisation, and instinct. At first glance, such differences might appear difficult to merge. Yet in practice, they produced a layered emotional tone that helped the film resonate across generations. Production teams quickly noticed that scenes between the two actors carried an organic quality that could not be manufactured through rehearsal alone. The contrast between structure and spontaneity gave the story emotional authenticity. This dynamic also changed how scenes were filmed, with directors allowing more flexibility in timing and delivery. Rather than forcing rigid repetition, production often allowed emotional discovery to happen naturally. From an analytical viewpoint, this method demonstrated how opposing artistic approaches can complement each other when mutual respect exists. It also highlighted how strong collaboration depends less on similarity and more on trust between performers. Crew members and co-actors later described the comedian's work method as far more structured than audiences assumed. Instead of improvising constantly, he typically delivered several takes exactly as scripted before experimenting with alternative deliveries. This showed a strong respect for writers, directors, and narrative packing. Only after establishing the foundation would he begin exploring variations. These explorations were rarely random. They were often built on emotional observations from previous takes. This approach required scene partners to stay fully present rather than relying on memorized rhythms. While potentially challenging, it often strengthened performances around him. From a documentary analysis perspective, this method reveals a performer who understood storytelling structure as deeply as he understood humor. His improvisation was not chaos, it was controlled expansion. By first honoring the written material, he created space to elevate scenes without undermining the narrative. This disciplined spontaneity became one of the defining technical characteristics of his acting career. During production of a pivotal courtroom sequence in the film, an unexpected real-life event changed the emotional atmosphere on set. One actor received devastating personal news involving the death of a parent. In high-pressure film environments, schedules often override personal circumstances. However, in this case, something different occurred. Instead of ignoring the emotional shift, a colleague quietly recognized distress and intervened privately. No public display was made, and no dramatic gestures followed. Instead, production was adjusted to allow time and space for grief. This moment later became one of the most frequently referenced examples of quiet professional compassion within the industry. It demonstrated emotional intelligence rarely discussed in entertainment narratives. Rather than centering attention on himself, the comedian prioritized another person's emotional well-being. From a workplace psychology perspective, this behavior reflects advanced emotional awareness and strong interpersonal sensitivity. It also challenges stereotypes about performers known primarily for high-energy personalities. After that incident, the professional relationship between the two actors reportedly deepened in subtle ways. There was no dramatic friendship narrative or public display of closeness. Instead, the shift appeared in performance tone and communication style. Scenes between their characters carried increased emotional realism. Observers later suggested this came from mutual trust rather than scripted direction. One actor reportedly adjusted comedic intensity, using restraint instead of constant humor when emotional scenes required balance. This type of adjustment demonstrates high-level collaborative awareness. In acting theory, listening and emotional responsiveness often matter more than delivery technique. The ability to sense a partner's emotional readiness can shape entire scenes. Documentary analysis suggests that this period showed the comedian operating at peak emotional sensitivity. He was not only reacting to dialogue, but to the emotional state of his co-actor. This capacity helped maintain the film's balance between humor and emotional seriousness. Film directors involved in the project later acknowledged that the emotional success of the movie relied heavily on this balance. Without restraint, the story could have shifted into exaggerated comedy. Without humor, it risked becoming emotionally heavy. Instead, it maintained an accessible emotional range. The actors' contrasting styles created a natural emotional rhythm. One expanded energy outward, the other grounded scenes internally. This created tension that felt authentic rather than forced. From a film studies perspective, this type of dynamic is difficult to replicate intentionally. It usually develops from personality differences combined with professional respect. The production team reportedly adjusted filming strategies to capture spontaneous emotional moments. Rather than forcing strict continuity, they allowed emotional authenticity to guide performance packing. This approach helped preserve moments that felt genuine rather than rehearsed. Beyond performance, colleagues often described the comedian as someone highly aware of emotional environments. He reportedly paid close attention to body language, tone shifts, and behavioral patterns. This allowed him to recognize stress or discomfort before others noticed it. In many accounts, his support came quietly rather than publicly. He rarely framed himself as a rescuer or central figure. Instead, he preferred subtle gestures, short conversations, or small acts of consideration. From a psychological viewpoint, this reflects strong empathetic processing. People with this trait often experience emotional environments intensely. While beneficial for others, it can also create internal emotional strain. This duality appears frequently in discussions about highly empathetic performers. Their ability to read others often comes with heightened internal emotional processing. Documentary analysis suggests this trait may have influenced both his comedic brilliance and his private struggles. Public perception often focused primarily on his high-speed humor and character work. Media coverage typically highlighted performance energy rather than emotional depth. Over time, this created a simplified narrative around his personality. However, colleagues who worked closely with him consistently described someone far more emotionally complex. They spoke about emotional sensitivity, deep listening skills, and quiet awareness. This difference between public image and private experience is common in entertainment history. Performers often become symbolic representations rather than fully understood individuals. In this case, the difference appears particularly strong. The contrast between public persona and reported private behavior has become a key focus in retrospective documentary storytelling. In later years, professional challenges began appearing alongside personal transitions. Changes in career momentum can affect performers deeply, particularly those whose identity is closely tied to creative performance. At the same time, personal life changes created additional emotional pressure. Individually, such transitions are manageable. Combined, they can create emotional overload. Documentary examination of this period suggests increasing stress and uncertainty. Friends and colleagues later described noticeable behavioral changes, including increased withdrawal and anxiety. These observations align with patterns often seen when neurological or psychological challenges begin emerging. A medical diagnosis later introduced additional fear. Being told one might develop a progressive neurological condition can deeply affect identity, especially for performers reliant on timing, memory, and physical expression. The fear of losing creative instinct can be emotionally devastating. In this case, the diagnosis created understandable anxiety. It suggested possible loss of control over movement, speech, and cognitive clarity. For someone whose career depended on mental speed and emotional awareness, this possibility carried deep psychological weight. Documentary analysis suggests that this period marked the beginning of intense internal fear about future identity. After his death, medical analysis revealed a more complex neurological condition than originally believed. The disease involved cognitive decline, confusion, hallucinations, and emotional instability. It is known for being difficult to diagnose early due to symptom overlap with other disorders. This revelation changed how many people interpreted his final years. Instead of viewing behavioral changes purely through mental health narratives, medical experts began discussing neurological degeneration. This distinction matters because neurological conditions can alter perception, thought patterns, and emotional processing in unpredictable ways. From a documentary perspective, this medical context helps explain previously confusing behavioral changes. Individuals experiencing such conditions may recognize cognitive decline while being unable to control it. This awareness often creates fear and frustration. Friends later described him as aware that something felt wrong, but unable to identify why. This type of experience is common in progressive neurological disorders. It can create intense emotional distress, even before diagnosis clarity exists. Colleagues who later reflected on his life often emphasized emotional bravery rather than weakness. They described someone who continued working despite internal confusion and fear. This reframing has become central to modern discussions about his legacy. Instead of defining him by his final struggles, many choose to focus on resilience and emotional generosity throughout his career. Industry peers have also highlighted the emotional labor involved in constant comedy performance. Making others feel safe, relaxed, or happy often requires strong emotional awareness. Over time, this can become psychologically demanding. While not unique to one performer, it appears frequently among entertainers known for emotional energy output. Documentary discussions increasingly explore this emotional cost. Years after the film collaboration, co-actors continued describing him using words related to presence, empathy, and emotional awareness. Not chaos, not unpredictability. Instead, they emphasized attention, listening, and emotional sensitivity. This shift in narrative reflects broader cultural reevaluation of public figures beyond performance stereotypes. Award ceremonies and public retrospectives later became moments where colleagues quietly acknowledged his emotional impact on their lives. Instead of dramatic tributes, many shared small personal memories. These smaller stories often carried greater emotional authenticity than public speeches. From a cultural analysis viewpoint, his legacy now exists in two parallel narratives. One celebrates performance genius. The other explores emotional depth and human complexity. Modern documentary storytelling often attempts to merge these narratives into a more complete portrait. His story also contributes to broader conversations about mental health, neurological illness, and emotional labor in entertainment industries. By examining his life honestly, documentaries help reduce stigma around both mental and neurological conditions. Paragraph 19. For audiences, these stories often reshape memory. Instead of remembering only performances, many now remember reported acts of kindness and emotional awareness. This shift reflects changing cultural priorities toward emotional authenticity. Today, discussions about his legacy often focus on balance. He is remembered both as a transformative performer and as someone described by colleagues as deeply emotionally aware. Documentary analysis suggests his greatest impact may exist in the combination of both. His story continues encouraging deeper conversations about creativity, empathy, and the unseen emotional realities behind public success.